Hello, this is a quick demonstration of Entangler. Entangler is a pair of apps for Mac and iOS which allows you to fire off actions on your Mac from your iOS device. These actions can be Unix shell scripts, Automator actions, or Apple scripts. Entangler uses iCloud to communicate, so it can work from across the room or across the world. So let's get started. I'm going to start by launching the Mac app. This is the first launch, so it's going to walk us through uh, some steps here. The first one, Entangler has to be running to work, of course. So it asks the user for permission to make it launch when they log in. Obviously, that would be the better thing to do, but if the user doesn't want that for some reason, they have the option to skip. But we'll go ahead and do it. Uh, Entangler uses the user task system to fire off the actions. The way that works is Unix shell script, Apple script, or Automator actions that are placed in an application-specific folder can be executed by that application. To make things a little bit easier for the user, Entangler can be set up to install actions in that folder. But to do that, the user has to grant the app permission to write into that folder. User can skip that and it still works. They just have to put the actions in themselves. We're going to go ahead and grant permission. That'll make things a little bit easier. So it's got the correct folder already selected. You can see it's in the user's library application scripts. Go ahead and say open, and that does the job. And that's pretty much it for the startup. And it'll appear up in the corner here in the status bar. There's nothing there yet because we haven't added any actions, but I'll go ahead and show you the settings menu. The user can toggle whether to launch at login here, and of course to quit. Now we're going to add an action. Had the user not granted permission to write to the scripts folder, this button would just open the Finder in that folder, making it easy for the user to drag and drop their scripts in. But I did grant permission, so it's going to give me this open dialog, which allows me to select an action. I'm going to select this Entangler test action. This is an Automator action that just pops open a dialog box that says that it worked. So you can see Entangler gives a preview of the action before you install it to make sure that it does what you actually want to do. If this was a shell script, it would show the text of the shell script. Same thing with Apple script. I'm going to go ahead and install it, and now it'll appear here. And then we have some things that we can do with it. We can set an icon for it. So I'll go ahead and set an icon. You can remove the icon if you want. There's also an option to set the background color. You can hide it on the device. This is a feature that one of my users requested that keeps the action around, but it doesn't show up on their iOS device. You can set an expiration time so that if, for example, Entangler is not running on the Mac for some reason or the Mac is asleep, some actions you might not want to have happen unless they can happen immediately. So the user can set an expiration date. And then they can export the action. This creates a little archive that contains the action and the user's selections for its icon and background color and expiration time and all that good stuff. And of course you can delete the action, which I'm going to skip doing for now. So now I'm going to switch to the iOS app. Again, it's the first time we've launched the app, so it's going to walk us through a little startup script. As I mentioned earlier, it uses iCloud to communicate. iCloud CloudKit specifically requires notifications to keep things in sync, so we're just letting the user know why we're about to ask them for permission to use notifications. I'll allow the notifications. And then there's a little bit of information about how the app requires the Mac app to be installed and running on their Mac. with a link to the Entangler website. And then finally, just a little bit of extra information before the user can get started. And here we go. We already see the MacBook Pro with the Entangler test action that I added. By default, it's in a grid. You can also make it a list if you want. There's this search functionality. I'll go ahead and show the Entangler, the action firing mechanism. So I'll go ahead and tap Entangler test. And then here in a few seconds on the Mac, it'll pop open the dialog box that the automator workflow was going to use. I say OK. And we also get a notification that the action worked. So that's the bulk of the app. We also have a few settings. We can see a list of all of the Macs that have been set up for this iCloud account. If for whatever reason we wanted to delete one because the Mac is no longer around, you can do that. You can also go and see all of the actions for that Mac. And as I mentioned earlier, there's the option to hide actions from the iOS device. It's not completely hidden. It's still accessible in this menu, but you can toggle whether it's hidden or not. You go back, you see that I just hid our one action that we have so far. You don't want it hidden though, so there it is. This version of Entangler adds home screen quick actions, so we can pick which actions we want to be available from the home screen. So I just made Entangler test available and just performed it. And again, it's going to pop up the dialog box on the Mac. There's a couple of settings. Disable LAN support. If you are at home or in the same place as your Mac and both your iOS device and the Mac are on the same local area network, it will bypass iCloud and communicate directly between the app and the Mac to perhaps make it a little bit faster in some cases. If for any reason you want to disable that, you can with this switch. It's going to work either way, but just a nice option that some of my users wanted. Another new feature is you can require Touch ID or Face ID, depending on what iOS device you're using. Just adds a little bit more security. Again, that was a user request. That's about it for the settings menu. There's this help center. This just takes you to the Entangler help website, which has a handful of FAQs and a means to contact me. And then last but not least, we have these what I call entanglements. These are different ways to use Entangler outside of the Entangler app. The first is xcallback URL entanglements. This allows you to construct a URL that will, if you open that URL in another app, it will launch Entangler and fire off an action, optionally with URLs to return to in the case of success or failure, and potentially arguments that you can add. And you can type in your own things, but there are also these sort of shortcuts. So if you put in device name, then the URL that it constructs will have your current iOS device's name instead of device name. Similar with date and time. And there's a few other things you can add. You can add some application-specific things, like Launch Center Pro, Workflow, and a few other options. And that will create this X callback URL entanglement. When we go back to the list of X callback URL entanglements, you'll see the one that I just created. You can copy the URL, and then I'm just going to put it in Safari. Paste it in here. Paste and go. Say yes, I want to open Entangler, and that's going to fire off my script. Next are action entanglements. This uses the action extension feature. To help demonstrate this one, I'm going to install another action called Open in Browser. This is one of the Entangler action archives I mentioned earlier. So double-clicking it on the Mac will automatically bring it up for Entangler to install with the preview. This is just, it'll open a HTTP or HTTPS URL, which on most Macs will open it in the browser. So I'll go ahead and install that. You can see it shown up on my list here. I'm going to create a new action entanglement that uses that and add an argument we have the same device name, date, and time, but now we also have selected data. This is whatever data is passed into the action extension. So for example, if you use this in Safari, it'll pass in the current URL. So I've created that. I'll go to Safari and go to a interesting website. Yeah, this looks good. And we'll pop open the activities. We'll have to enable Entangler since it's just installed. And pick Entangler. And we'll see we have the open in browser. So I'll tap that. And you can see on the Mac that it is opening Safari with the website that I was just visiting. And last but not least, there are watch entanglements. Entangler currently has a watchOS application. I do not have a watch connected to this iOS device, so I'll have to switch to a simulator to demonstrate that. I'll be right back for that. Okay, now I'm going to demonstrate the watch app using the simulator. I'll go ahead and launch the app in the iOS simulator. And we'll go to the entanglements screen. And now that there's a watch available, the watch entanglements menu option becomes available. I'll select it. This is almost the same as the action entanglements. We can choose one of our actions, and then we can add a few arguments. It's very similar, device name, date and time. Now there's a choice to make the watch prompt the user for some input. I'll go ahead and put that in just to show how that happens. We'll save it, and now we have a watch entanglement. So I'll launch the app on the watch. It'll just take a moment to sync up. Now you see our action that I just created. I'll go ahead and tap it, and since I said to prompt for input, it's going to ask us for some input. I'm just going to pick the date just for an easy thing. See, it triggers off the action and then triggers the action on the Mac. That's mostly it. I'll just demonstrate that you can add more than one action. And it shows up as expected. It can be triggered as expected. Delete, and it goes away as expected. And that is it for Entangler.